Thank you for watching KTN News. Welcome back to News Diary. By now, you know President William Ruto will be traveling to the United States for a meeting with President Joe Biden. A little bit later, a lot is expected to be discussed. And to just give us a preview on what will be discussed is Ambassador Meg Whitman, United States Ambassador to Kenya, who earlier appeared on Spice FM to discuss 60 years of Kenya-USA diplomatic relations and President Ruto's visit to the United States. Just what are some of the issues that will be discussed there? Let us tune in and listen in to what she said.
And we are grateful that you're here with us. Our guest is in the studio, the Ambassador of the United States to Kenya. Sometimes people call her Kenya's Chief Marketing or Investments Officer and Ambassador to the U.S., Margaret Meg Whitman. Good morning, Balozi.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Happy to be here.
How does it feel?
Feels good.
Karibu sana. What do your friends call you? Can we call you Meg?
You can call me Meg.
Ah, good. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you.
City here has the day's proverb. Every week, City goes to one African country. He's a researcher. So he researches the best proverbs in that country. Then he brings us one proverb a day. Now, your job, number one, is to listen to the proverb. Job number two is to give us your interpretation of the proverb. Okay?
All right.
City.
Yes.
This week we are in?
We're in the Republic of Malawi, but I will certainly not call Her Excellency Meg. That I will not.
What will you call her?
Your Excellency.
Okay.
It is only when the flood is gone that you can claim to be lucky.
It's only when the flood is gone that you can claim to be lucky.
Yes.
What's your interpretation of this proverb?
Well, thank you for that, and it's great to be here. I think what that proverb is trying to say is when the flood is gone, you see what's really left. And sometimes it's only you and your family, and you have lost all your possessions. And so sometimes you realize that you can be lucky to be alive and to have a very small number of things. And sometimes we get caught up in the materialism of the world, but when the flood is gone, what really matters is still left.
So what's the lesson?
Lesson, be grateful for what you have and be resilient.
Great. It's a good one. So Kenya and US are marking 60 years of diplomatic ties, and this will be marked by a state visit by President William Ruto to America to be hosted by President and Dr. Jill Biden. Why a state visit? What's the difference between a state visit and the other visits that President Ruto himself and other presidents have had to the U.S.?
Yeah. So the state visit is really the highest honor that a country and a head of state can have. And it has all the formalities of a dinner at the White House, what they call a state dinner. Then there is obviously a bilateral engagement between the cabinet of the United States and the cabinet of Kenya in this case. And there is a very formal welcome ceremony, and then lots of interactions with other branches of the government and the people of the United States. So it's very formal and really a very big honor for the Kenyan people.
So how big is it of a difference between what this visit is going to be versus the others? For example, President Uhuru Kenyatta had several visits to the White House and met with the president.
Yes, but I don't think he had what we call a state dinner.
Okay.
At the White House. There'll be 300 to 400 people from a broad cross-section of Americans, a broad cross-section of Kenyans, and the diaspora. By the way, you know there's a very large number of prominent Kenyans who are now Kenyan Americans, and many of them have been invited. And so that is a very formal and a big honor. When a normal visit to the United States by any head of state never involves a state dinner unless it is a state visit. And just to give you some perspective, this administration has had just 5 state visits in their first 4 years, and this will be the 6th and final one in his first term.
So when you consider relations between two states, any two states, what would be the significance of something like this? And so let's look specifically then at the US and Kenya. And to say then, like you said, other visits have taken place between President of Kenya and presidents of the United States. But a state visit, what's the significance of this in the relations between the two countries?
I think it really does two things. It underscores the strength of the relationship between Kenya and the United States. You know, we've been working together for 60 years on regional peace and security, on trade and investment, on shared, now recently, climate solutions. And this has been quite a tight working relationship for many years. It's had its ups and downs, like every relationship, but it has been a very solid relationship. And I think it is an acknowledgement of that relationship on the occasion of the 60th anniversary, if you will, of the partnership. And it will have the highest level of the United States government really focused on this, and we will discuss a lot of issues that are important to both countries.
How would you define or describe U.S.-Kenya relations or the relationship today?
I would say, in a word, it is excellent. It is deep, it is broad. As I said, it spans from regional peace and security to trade and investment to a health partnership. We've been working with the Kenyans on health, malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS for many, many years. Digital and technology cooperation. I think one of the reasons I was asked to be the ambassador to Kenya was because of Silicon Savannah. Today, Kenya is the technology capital of East Africa, and actually probably the technology capital of the entire continent. And we will talk about that and the digitalization actually of the continent. And I should also say, I think this is a recognition of the importance of Africa to the United States. Kenya is the country that's being honored, but it is I think it's a recognition that Africa is a very, very important continent, certainly to the world, but particularly to America in the next 20 years.
Why?
Well, as you well know, by 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will live in Africa, and 1 in 3 working-age people will live in Africa. So it's going to be the locus of population. It will be the youngest population. Therefore, it's with the working age, and it will be the largest consumer market in 2050. So that makes everyone need to stand up and say, what are we going to do with Africa?
Right. Meg, I've watched many of your presentations so far in many events, and you go very, very big on saying, why Kenya, why Africa? I don't bother about the other Africa bit, I just bother on what you're saying about why Kenya. And you're big on those things and saying the future, the kind of society that we have, the education, the opportunities, the everything about Kenya, and then why American companies should come and invest here. What I've noticed is that that's why I say you are marketing Kenya to American companies and say, come and invest in this country. A marked difference from your predecessors. We're used to American ambassadors coming to Kenya and going gung-ho on democracy, on the rule of law, on corruption, and dangling the aid carrot and saying, so we're going to give you aid, or we're going to withdraw aid, or we're going to suspend aid because you're not doing this and the other, and threatening sanctions to some political leaders or players and business people not to visit America because of one reason or the other. You've not done that. Is this your brief or is this your style?
Probably a little bit of both. When I was asked to come, as I said, it was really my technology background that I think the President of the United States thought was a very good match for Kenya. But you also have to remember, I'm not a career Foreign Service officer. I am actually a business person. I spent my entire 40-year career running companies. And I didn't know much about Africa. I'd been here on business, but I had not lived outside the United States before, and had certainly been to Kenya, but only probably 3 or 4 times on business. And what I understood here almost immediately was the potential of this country. And I think, frankly, what Kenya and Africa needs the most is jobs, jobs, jobs. Good jobs for young people. Today there's 1 million college graduates in Kenya, I think, every year, about 300,000 of which get jobs that are befitting, if you will, of a college graduate. So there's tremendous talent that's underutilized, and Americans are looking for places to invest, looking for supply chain diversification. If we learned anything from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we learned that having a single source supply chain, a single country, is probably too risky. And so there's lots of companies that are looking to go someplace else. And guess what Kenya has that they want? Really great workforce and 93% renewable energy, because every company is trying to get to zero net emissions to get to their Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions goals. So supply chain diversification and green energy is a wonderful calling card for Kenya, and we hope we can improve foreign direct investment and create more jobs.
Does this mean America is now less concerned about corruption and governance issues in the country?
Well, corruption, as I have said in many speeches, corruption is still an issue here in Kenya. And what I have said is, if corruption is not gotten under control, it will be the reason that Kenya does not fulfill its full potential. And so we have very frank discussions about corruption, and we try to support an anti-corruption agenda with the government and the country. But ultimately, it's up to the Kenyans to decide that this is something they really want to tackle.
Is there a balance of relations between Kenya and the US? And when I ask that because are we looking at both countries seated at the table with equal tools with which to operate this relationship? Or are we seeing that the US is big brother to Kenya and is leading the way?
Well, I think it's actually quite an equal partnership on a lot of dimensions. So first of all, the United States is the largest export market for Kenya, I think next to Uganda. Last year we were bigger than this year Uganda, I think, took the first spot again. But we are the largest export market, which gives Kenyans a very big seat at the table. And then in the health partnership, yes, we provide technology and know-how and some financials, but the Kenyans implement what has been a remarkably successful PEPFAR program here. I would say that has been one of the hallmarks of our 60-year partnership. So, yes, the United States is a much bigger economy.
Indeed.
But I would say, and regional peace and security, you're leading the way there. We're, behind the scenes trying to help. So I'd say it's quite equal. Probably the advantage that America has is a much bigger economy.
Speaking of PEPFAR, CT?
Yes, you saw the movement of my hands.
Yes.
What I've often marveled at is why it is the U.S. doesn't harp loudly enough about what PEPFAR has done. I speak as somebody who worked in programs that were funded by PEPFAR, and I witnessed firsthand what it did, and I have never seen anything that has been as transformative.
Yeah.
We have AGOA, very good, yes, business, yes. But the devastating effects of HIV were so cataclysmic,
Yes.
so absolutely horrific that when you have one program, just one, that injects not just expertise, but continuous hand-holding and continuous money that ensures that not only do you get remedial care, but you continue to receive the appropriate measure of care that you need for not a decade, decades. Now,
For the rest of your life.
yes. Now that I do not know of any intervention, even when I look at other countries on the planet, that you can actually compare with it. Why don't you harp about it? Why don't you? Why doesn't the U.S. talk about this thing and whistles and bells and the whole works? Because even to date, even when we say that we have more or less understood it and it's under control, some of the biggest support that the Ministry of Health in this country gets comes from there.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that, because I think it is one of the, if not the most successful United States government programs ever in the history of the United States, working with other countries. And we just finished celebrating the 20th year of PEPFAR in Africa, and there's been over 24 million lives saved. And there are people who are living very productive lives on retrovirals, for the rest of their life.
Yes.
And there's been a whole infrastructure that's been built up for the
Yes.
delivery of these medicines, which, by the way, came in handy in COVID.
Yes.
And if there's ever another pandemic, that infrastructure that's been built will be very important. And I think we do talk about it some. We talked about it on the 20th anniversary. But I think America, perhaps we don't, quote unquote, market ourselves very well. And I think it's because we are happy to be able to do what we have done. I think we understand that many people in Kenya and other countries of Africa understand what has been done. But I'm not sure it's in our nature to brag about that kind of thing. And, interestingly, when I came, often you would go to events that were put on by the World Food Program or UNICEF.
Yeah.
But there would be never anything about the United States. And you probably know we're probably 80% of the funding of the World Food Program.
Yes.
And probably 40 or 50% of UNICEF. But we often hang back and let the World Food Program and UNICEF lead forward. And I think it's, we could have a debate about whether it's the right thing or not. But I think, there's a humbleness about it, which I appreciate.
On a planet where bad news travels faster than everything else, and the influence of the U.S. is felt literally everywhere, good news should take precedence.
Feedback.
Yes. Having said that, this is something that I've often wanted to ask, and I'm glad you're here. What would you say is the U.S. policy for Africa?
I'd say the first thing is, particularly under this administration, I think President Biden has recognized the future importance of Africa, the demographics that you and I discussed, that America needs to pay more attention to Africa as a trading partner, as a regional peace and security partner. And, you know, in life, half the battle is showing up. And I think for many years we did not show up as we might have on the continent. And really under this administration, we have showed up in a much bigger way. The African Leaders Summit, I think, you know, in fact, me being asked to go to Kenya in some ways underscores that. And so I think the strategy is we're going to show up. We're going to do everything we can to offer Kenyans and other African countries a choice of who you do business with, who you do regional peace and security. So it's not you can only do business with us or only work with us, but we need to have a set of offerings that is more attractive than perhaps our geopolitical competitors.
So Kenya's biggest export market is equals USA.
Yes.
We've got the AGOA,
Yes.
the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, which is coming to an end. And we'll have a conversation about what happens thereafter.
Yes.
But do you think Kenya has actually optimized the AGOA opportunities?
Well, AGOA
or
has been
maximized?
It has. It's been a big success here, as you know. I think it's increased 12 times in the last 10 years. The amount of exports to the United States under AGOA, it's well over $500 or $600 million today. Probably the biggest beneficiary has been the apparel business. That has been an enormous success story. And by the way, apparel is a big employer. So that's important. But there are many, many more categories. I think there's over 900 categories that you can export duty-free to the United States under AGOA, and Kenya has not taken advantage of all 900 categories. And one of the things that when AGOA gets renewed, which I believe it will, I want to sit down with Rebecca Miano at the Ministry of Industry and Trade and say, okay, what are the next 20 or 30 categories that Kenya could really take advantage of? Many of that would be agriculture. I think there's technology. There's many other categories. So I think it's been a big success, but not fully utilized, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah. In fact, the conversation that I had, Rebecca Miano saying yesterday, that yes, we have actually not done enough, and
Yes.
we should look at what we could do to expand. Why do you think we haven't done enough? Is it a lack of opportunities? Is it lack of awareness?
I think it's lack of awareness. It's perhaps lack of an economic focus for the government of Kenya. I mean, I think Rebecca has this, the list of all 900 categories in front of her, and she's saying, okay, what can Kenya do uniquely better than anyone else, and where is the momentum that we can build on? So I think she's right, and I think there's quite a bright future here. And by the way, in the United States, when people question the renewal of AGOA, they never question, does it work and is it great for the African countries and things, but they say, why hasn't it been utilized more? I was back in the States about a month ago, and I had a number of conversations with Congress, and their only question was, why is there not more utilization of this? So I think we have to work hard together to utilize more categories to the benefit of Kenyans and, frankly, to the benefit of the Americans.
There have been ongoing trade talks between Kenya and the USA. I don't know what stage they are at right now.
Yeah.
You can tell us about that. And so how do those play with AGOA's renewal?
Yeah. Well, they're two separate things because AGOA is for the entire African continent. Not every country is eligible for AGOA, but most are. And then there is what's called the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is only between Kenya and the United States. And it would be the first strategic trade and investment partnership between an African country and the United States. And so we want to do AGOA for the continent, but this is about how do we maximize trade between our two countries. And it's coming along. These things are quite technical and quite detailed. And I'd say we're probably 30 to 40% of the way through. I had hoped that we would get this done before the state visit, but we were not able to get it done. There's good progress. We'll talk about that at the state visit. I expect it will be done by the end of the year at the latest.
The underlying issue that could respond to the question of why it is all the tenets of AGOA have not been utilized or taken advantage of lies in just one word, corruption. You see, when corruption is a fundamental business within a country, the entrepreneurship mentality that is required to take such advantages does not take center stage. What takes the prevailing stage is corruption, because people pursue it with the same vigor and energy as they would pursue actually structured business, such as the opportunities that are offered by AGOA. So even as there is this partnership, the questions that will continuously be asked is, what is it that this partnership is doing to ensure that those in leadership understand the need for accountability and the need for them to ensure that there is a concerted, visible effort to stamp out this one bane, this one burden that prevents this country from actually moving forward fast in the direction that it could.
Yeah. So I agree with you. As I said, I think that's one of the biggest issues facing Kenya. And by the way, it's not just Kenya, right? This is true in many, many parts of the world. And it is a very difficult and intractable problem because it's been going on in many countries for so long. And so I think we have very frank conversations with the government on this. We have a number of programs. I have two very senior, what we call assistant U.S. attorneys here that are helping with the court system, you know, doing capacity building. We have a number of programs. But in the end, I think the Kenyan people need to decide that this is something that they really want tackled. And by the way, I think the media has a role to play in that. And I think that the government, you know, has got to take a firmer stance on this.
I mean, far be it from us to have a political conversation, but if we look at the jurisdiction where you hail from, when we look at things that often would go wrong, according to the people's choice, we don't hear silence, that people speak up. There's a huge lobbying capacity and practice in the US. There is a systemized way of doing things, for which in many cases corruption is frowned upon. And if we're talking about the one big impediment to development here, we're looking at corruption. We can't run away from that. And we are at the same time saying that there's a relationship between the two. Would you encourage that kind of thing where the citizen's voice then rises up and speaks to its government to hold it accountable?
So America has a history, as you say, of fighting corruption. It's easy to forget. Do you remember the mafia in the 20s and 30s? I mean, this was enormous corruption, and it was what we called organized crime. It wasn't crime, it was organized crime. And it took a number of years to fight this. It took courts, it took people, it took the government, and finally we overcame that. But every country, and by the way, there still is corruption in the United States from time to time, right? We see that. So this is a journey that will never end, in my view. And so I think the question for Kenya is, how can you accelerate that journey? And what can you do as the media? What should the president be doing? What should the country be doing to really tackle this?
Do you think the people's voice should be amplified when it comes to this?
Keeping
leaders accountable?
I do.
Are we going to a break?
I know you have conversations from time to time with President William Ruto. Do you talk about these issues of corruption?
You know, I have frank conversations with the government up and down. I meet with many people in the government. And by the way, so do many other heads of mission here. It's a very strong group of ambassadors here, particularly from Europe and Australia. But we do focus on other things, as you know, most of the time on other things, whether it's regional trade, whether it is regional peace and security, whether it is job creation here. And what I will say, you mentioned that corruption may be the one reason that other parts of AGOA are not taken advantage of. That's probably true. But also, when you go after an industry like technology or apparel, you have to have a really dedicated strategy and a focus. I'm a big believer in focus. And so if Kenya decided they were going to go after the apparel business and look at what it is today. The president was just out at Ati River announcing 20,000 new jobs. And they're good jobs. They're well-paying jobs, 3 meals a day, daycare, medical clinics. So you have to go after a sector. BT Cotton. Cotton, as I understand it, used to be a big business here.
Yes, it was.
And fabric is important for the apparel business. Right now, all the apparel companies import fabric from Tanzania and I think other places. And so bringing back the cotton industry is very important. So how do you do that? You've got to say, we're going to go try to find 250,000 acres of cotton. Who could do that? Homa Bay, Kakamega, Kilifi, and then you've got to, help them get the seeds and organize that. It won't necessarily happen by itself, not because of corruption, but because it needs sort of a catalytic function.
Okay.
Wazir, you came under fire
Yes.
last year when you made certain comments about this being the election that took place then being one of the fairest or most transparent. And, whether you heard it or not, the speculation was real. Would you stand by the same sentiments or the same comments that you made about that time, regardless of what anybody said after that?
I would.
Okay.
I would
Why?
stand by.
Why?
Because by all reports, not because of what America said, but there was well over 1,000 election observers here. There were independent groups who made those comments, and from what we saw and what those groups saw, this was a free and fair election. And I think, listen, I ran for governor of California, so I understand politics.
Yeah.
And people said, "Oh, weren't you, upset or hurt?" And I said, "Well, relative to what I endured running for governor of California, on a scale of 1 to 10, that was a 1. And what I encountered in California was a 10. So it's politics. And you probably saw I had a meeting with Ryla not too long ago. I have a great deal of respect for him. I'm excited about the potential of his, potentially running the AU. And that's good for East Africa, probably good for Kenya. So we had a very nice conversation, and I have a lot of respect for him.
So there's also been talk about America is actually doing all these things because they realized that this whole conversation about good governance, corruption, and talking like the big brother to Kenya has actually made Kenya face east and to the detriment somehow of America. Do you think this is now a move that will say, look, we actually are partners and not necessarily looking at you as, small brothers, but we are partners in life? And then what do you say about Kenya's diplomatic relations with the other countries, Russia included?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I don't think we have, I think you used the word made Kenya face west. That is not at all what happened. It means there's completely Kenya's choices. And as I said earlier, I think our objective, my personal objective here, is to work with the United States government policy and resources to give Kenya's choice. And, listen, there are lots of actors here. I think Kenya will interact with many of them. And we just want to make sure that we're showing up with, something that you want to do business with, that we're a country that you want to align yourself with and you want to do business with, whether it's regional peace and security or trade and investment or people-to-people ties. And so my view is, I come from the private sector. We have to be more competitive. We have to be a better offer than other people. So it's not a coercion in any sense of the matter. It's we want to be a better offer.
For the business to thrive, then Kenya needs to be able to have the money to be able to run.
Yes.
Okay. So if you look at the last years under the Jubilee administration, Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, there was a lot of, borrowing and saying we need to bring in money so we can expand our infrastructure. And that's why they were going to the commercial market, facing east, talking to China and such. Is there an opportunity for Kenya to have such kind of financial relations with America? Where we say that, yes, there's many projects that are coming, are going to be financed long-term by American government so that you